Hello, I'm Mark Valdivieso. I'm VP with Indogene, and we're discussing the exciting topic of content today in this panel. The pandemic has really put a spotlight on content, and as every company is racing to redefine their commercial approach, and under the assumption that we greatly reduced access for face-to-face meetings, even as the future, the steady future state. Content becomes critical in order to drive a great customer experience. And so I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel today of leading thinkers and doers as it relates to content strategy, content supply chain, and content intelligence. So first of all, we have Tara Stewart, who is VP of Worldwide Engagement and Planning Content Capabilities at Bristol Myers Squibb. Elias Khalil, VP of Global Commercial Services, Eli Lilly and Company. Kate Greengrove, Senior Director of Content Strategy and Operations, US Pharma, GSK, and Thomas Thestrup-Turk, VP, Corporate Vice President of Commercial Operations at Novo Nordisk. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Be with you.
Great. Why don't we kick off with a question for Elias? And Elias, you know, when you started this journey of fundamentally rethinking content in your organization, what were some of the shortcomings, some of the insights and dynamics within your organization that were exposed or heightened during the pandemic that led you to initiate this journey?
Yeah, I think we've been on a transformation journey when it comes to content. Obviously, consumers' expectations are being shaped by what they experience with companies outside pharma. And we as consumers also have had higher expectations from what we believe we should be able to achieve to our customers. And with COVID, I think, and the pressure on our margins, we had to fundamentally rethink how do we do content. So we had started right before the pandemic. 2 years ago, we started with having our own internal agency to insource a lot of the work. And as our system matured, we had to take it to the next level. With personalization being kind of the theme for pharma that have been trying to drive for a few years, there was this tension between being able to personalize and put more content out, and then the regulatory and the compliance. And that tension was making the system become a little bit on the verge of collapse. So we got to a point where late last year, and this is where things started moving really quickly, our CEO decided that he was going to take things a little bit personal. So he had all of the central functions reporting into him. And this has really elevated the discussion, the level of attention to the topic, and has really kind of raised our ambitions. So that's kind of what has shaped in the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months. And I think COVID has put us on steroids.
Kate, I see you nodding. Have you seen similar experiences?
For sure. We were on that transformation and moving at a good pace, but COVID certainly made us go into hyperdrive.
So you've seen that across the industry. So Thomas, you've been on this journey for a little bit of time, for quite some time now, right? So, and obviously this is a journey, not a one-time transformation. So I apologize if I used the word transformation synonymously with evolution, but what were some of the hurdles and pitfalls in that journey, and ultimately, what were the keys to success in making progress?
Yeah, so I'll actually start with a reflection that I've had recently, and I had to go in and look up the Danish word and translate that into English, because it's what I think what happened with COVID is really that the pharma industry has been emerged into a developer liquid, if you know what I'm saying. All the things that has maybe been not very clear before in terms of our commercial model, including that of content production, has suddenly become very, very clear, right? And that's including the good and the bad and the ugly. And this is not just something about content, it's about how we work as a pharma company and the pharma industry. And we have simply been immersed in this developing liquid, and now things are standing out terribly clear, right? So we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, including content and the way we work with that, the promotional commercial aspect. But our journey started similar to Elias way before COVID, but it's simply just accelerated it. So back to your question, the pitfalls and hurdles, they were there before COVID, and I think actually COVID has only accelerated the transformation. So it's helping us in this transformation because it's like a wrecking ball coming in on the right. And you know, what we've usually done is produce a lot of materials and a lot of content for the one and only channel, the field force. Still relevant, but now we're seeing a lot of other channels explode, right? So both in terms of need of capability to execute on those channels, but also quick content that is fit for the channel. And so, of course, if we want to execute in more channels, that adds up volume, and budgets are not going to increase. Actually, on the contrary. So that's a dilemma right there. More content, less budget. What do? We need to apply a level of operational excellence within content we haven't seen before. A lot of paradigms needs to be broken. A lot of ways of working, and this is how we've always done. Are being smashed. And I personally think it's for the better. Maybe not so much for agencies, and I'm sorry if there's anyone listening out that for there, but because they're going to see their work being disrupted. And I think agencies still have a place, but it's not going to be rate reduction. And Lily is taking the consequence. We're taking the consequence. And one thing is price. I'm much more interested in the data around content. So what content engages, which channels, and why? How we're executing. Right? So answering those questions is the real gold mine, in my opinion, not just a cheaper price, which is great, and more volume, possibly good. I don't know. Well, it depends, right? We pick the right ones, and then more in the insights in what content actually engages, through which channels, etc. So there's a lot of hurdles in that. The biggest one is up here, mindset. And then there's a lot of technicalities, but that's not a problem compared to mindset change.
Yeah. So Thomas, if I could underscore the mindset piece of that more so, because as you highlighted, a lot of us have been on this journey, and a lot of the folks listening in have been on this journey for quite some time, and maybe at varying degrees of maturation and evolution. Again, the perfect storm, absolutely. And it's putting wind in the sails, to steal a comment that my leader actually says, right? It's the wind. But by the way, the other side isn't all fully in the same place, right? So it's the mindset, it's the letting go of the past or embracing what the future can be. And by the way, it's not a 180-degree turn, right? Some of this is really how you shift, how you think about the role of the rep, right? You said it, they're not going to go away, but the role and maybe how they go about what they do may be different based on customer expectations. We know our customers are engaging across multiple channels, so it's not about the same message everywhere. It's about how do I provide the relevant information to you, and that's where the data comes. And I highlight all of that, and I think you all have said that in different ways, but it also starts with engagement planning, right? Of really looking at the who and the what, and then that allows you to really develop a robust content strategy, which I'll share in my experience is the biggest shift in our industry, because they've been very tactically focused, right? And doing well with it, by the way, but you're right, you can't sustain that and do more of them. And customization is required or expected, I should say, depending on, again, if we put ourselves in our customer view. So hopefully, that ties all of these things together, because I think it couldn't be perfect time.
The burning platform.
Very good.
Yes.
So Tara, if you could also further elaborate, the next big step in this way to transform the sub-chain aspect of content is the concept of instantly generated content and instantly approved content. So how far are we from this vision as an industry, and what, in your opinion, does it take to get there?
So instant is a relative term in pharma, but I'll say near time, right? Because we have had the opportunity and luxury of generating content and insights in real time, having them approve real time and out within, you know, hour or 2 hours within the context of when that happened. But that's small scale, right? It's very difficult to scale that in the way that you're doing it. So I do think we have work to do. I do think you're seeing progress in the landscape of social media, right? I know we're getting much faster and even more so. I think, at least in our view, it's one of the reasons, at least, we're trying to really go deeper. And I think some of you may have highlighted this, of you start creating your content agnostic of channel. And yes, not every piece will go through every channel. It's not how the world works. But thinking through what are when they go through review, where would this be used? How would it be approved, and getting it approved for multiple uses, and the metadata associated with this. Now, we're in a crawl, walk, run aspect, you know, full transparency. We've done it in channels. Now we're talking about scale across all channels. It's a very different scale. So I don't want to oversell it, but that's what we're trying to aspire to. And by taking a lot of what is lower risk, right? So if we get that right, and your content is assembled and has a fast pass review because it meets all the criteria and you know it's all approved, etc., I don't have to burden MedLegal review with a live meeting in context. They're spending their time on those things that might be more immediate and that we want to have go through the content food chain or supply chain, if you will. So obviously we're a ways from that, but I think as you start to take some of the fundamentals out and leverage technology and drive that experience we're talking about, it'll make room for us to actually get faster and more near time or as close to real time as feasible with the right checks and balances.
What's your prediction? Are we 1 year away? Are we 5 years away? If you predictions will always follow you, but I put you on the spot.
Well, I guess prediction in what context? An individual brand accomplishing that, an entire market across all brands, scale across worldwide for those that are really driving the pull through and adaptation. So I think the answer is it depends, and some are doing it in pieces at a brand level. I know we are. I know some are doing it across multiple channels or herd-driven simplification. Now we're really talking about doing it across all. So I think it's here. I think everyone is making progress. And I think the receptivity or the adoption within the organization is going to be driven by, one, some of what's here and how we can continue to demonstrate the value, right? And value isn't always dollars, but obviously we're building off of impact already. So that's helpful.
One of the things we're measuring is time to market, and I think Tara's alluding to that. I mean, again, we've always the MLR, PRB, whatever you call it in your area. It's definitely been a major barrier, still is, and that's, you know, having a more modular approach to what is already approved, what is maybe requiring a light approval. We're seeing it brings time down, and that's absolutely imperative to measure. And then this word of content discipline. We simply need to take it more serious. We just can't, you know, shove out content left and right without having a discipline around how tagging, etc., goes on for intelligence, first of all, but also, again, as you said, you know, speed. So just being more. It's pretty unsexy to talk about, but it's about being disciplined around production.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is an agree, and this ties to your comment on discipline. It also is not everything could or should be modular, right? There are going to be things that you create once or that are unique and variable, if you will, to a particular situation or channel. It's really focusing on those that are reused, not changed every time. It's a consistent set, and you can add to it, right? And you can build on the context and use it in different forms. So that's the other learning and governance piece, if you will, that I think becomes, or discipline, I think was the word Thomas used, right? That becomes really important.
Very good. It's exciting times ahead for us, and if time to market, Thomas, becomes hours and not months or weeks, then that'll certainly shift the way that we execute in our industry.
Well, and you're also not building, hopefully, a tactic every time.
Yeah, moving to campaigns versus tactics.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So along those lines, Kate, you've spoken about content as a product in the past, which is, you know, something that we see in other industries, but not necessarily in pharma and biotech. Could you provide some more insight what that really would look like for us and how that can be achieved?
Sure. And this is about that discipline that we've just been speaking about. Content should be purposely designed, packaged, produced, distributed, and tested just like any other product. Like other products, content works best when it's designed to solve a specific task or problem, right? And then it can create some value. But that value is only created if it actually gets in front of the eyes that will consume it, right? So there needs to be, we need to understand very clearly which channels our customers prefer and place it there. We need to treat content as a product. That means you have to maintain a constant production, right? So that's that speed we were talking about and the frequency of it. And then packaging, right? So packaging can make a big difference to a product and to content too. Blogs, quizzes, white papers, images. If people engage in a different way, they may even remember what we're telling them differently. I like to think of a wine bottle, right? Think of a label on a wine bottle. Even that's the best example of how a great package can get a subpar product consumed, right? Because it's the packaging. But it all goes back to value. People are willing to pay for value, which in the case of content means they're willing to share information with you so that they can engage further in the conversation. They can continue that conversation. They can engage your content more fully. So, you know, we need to focus content on what people want and need rather than on what we want to tell them, right? We need to find the intersection of the two. There's a lot of content out there, so we need to find ways to stand out. But that's really about creating relevance, which creates value.
Thank you. Any thoughts from the panel around that concept?
Yeah, I think I often reflect on why is it that I choose to not unsubscribe from certain brands. And, you know, being involved in the content space, I know exactly what they're doing. I know where they're tracking me. I know when they see me on Google, and then they see me on Instagram, and they see me on LinkedIn, and I'm always like interested in studying how they're evolving me as a consumer on their journey. I don't think we're there yet as a pharma or as a life sciences. No. As a patient, for example, I've just done a few telehealth visits. It hasn't been that easy. And as, you know, put myself into the shoes of a physician that's trying to operate within this new environment, and the rate of change and disruption is huge. And then you put with it what we're trying to do from our end. The answer is not let's inundate them with content and hope that one of the content pieces or one of the tactics, you'll achieve engagement on it. That's not the solution. The solution is the right content at the right time, in the right channel. You know, that's mainly the formula. So we're not there yet, but I think the burning platform is definitely there. We're getting a lot of friends now that are interested in the way we're getting things done internally.
But I do think it's that discipline that Tom spoke about.
Yeah, the discipline, it's philosophically treating content as not something you do, you know, it's basically the core of your marketing planning, right? You gotta plan those experiences for the audiences that you have, and then drive it with discipline, with KPIs, measure everything, and make empirical decision making into what's the next content you're gonna serve.
Right. Well, and I think that's where you're going to have the challenges or the continued mindset shifts, right? Because we're an entire industry that's built around the field force, not necessarily our customers. And this is a shift, right? And again, I'll repeat, I don't see them going away. I do see the role drastically different, and it may not be as large and robust as it once was because of all the opportunity and touch points that you can optimize and really maximize that rep engagement. But I think that's still the question, at least for all the colleagues that I've talked to, is they're asking the question, but no one's making both moves yet. Right?
And one thing I think it's going to be really hard to replace is that level of relationship and trust that the good rep does have. And with that, your content just comes further, right? So that's what we as an industry need to balance it better and definitely more efficient. because that can be done, sure. But the reps are there in the future as well. We just need to augment them with in good content, engaging content in different channels, right? And make their job easier as well. And that's what we need to do.
Yeah, the concept of a rep as a quarterback, right?
Yeah.
So
I'd like to challenge that. I'd like to challenge the rep as the quarterback.
Right.
I'd like to challenge the customer is the quarterback, right? The customer is the quarterback, and the rep just helps facilitate that one channel.
Well, we play soccer, so.
No, Kate, I couldn't agree more, and that's where I was going. We're kind of antiquated and anchored around, as an industry, a internal colleague and representative model, which I'm not criticizing. It's been successful, but exactly is focusing on the customer, because we're seeing their behavior is not, it's all over, right? And that's what this is helping to solve, is really being where they want to receive it. And driving that experience that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think the one thing that goes hand in hand with content is the various analytics that we will have to deploy to our field force, because whether we like it or not, the most personalized solution that we could deploy to a customer is a human being having a discussion armed with all the data on the engagement, with potential suggestions into what we might be able to have discussions on. So that's, I agree. I agree with you, Kate. It's the customer that should be front and center, but I think we shouldn't send rep just to have the interaction in vacuum without, creating that surround system for them and also for the customer.
Yeah, and Elias, I think that goes two ways. Right? It's providing the visibility and transparency of reps what customers are doing, because that may change what they want to do or think they should do, and vice versa, their insights, because to your point, they have the relationship and they know them. The one thing you just have to balance is it shouldn't be overridden based on someone's belief, right? Both should all come together to really drive that optimal focus on the customer.
Yep.
So along those lines, I'm shifting some questions around to follow the dialogue here. And Kate, maybe I start off with you on this. Which areas of the organization needs to have the greatest cultural shift to achieve what we talked about here? Which part of the organization has to shift the furthest? And please, everybody comment on that as well.
So I think marketing needs to shift. So I think they need to stop thinking about content as a series of projects, right? But think about it holistically and long-term. Remember my production comment, right? We need to produce it. We need to stop making campaigns perfect before we launch them. Speed and frequency, as we've said, are both important. And so while we're working on that super high quality content, we need to think about pushing smaller pieces of content, related content out. I think we need to think about our content as an extension of our product, not just advertising, but an extension of our product, right? What you offers a solution and it solves a problem. So I'm going to say it's umbrellas, right? Say you sell umbrellas, right? And I use this example because I read it once and I thought it was really simple and easy, right? So you sell umbrellas, and umbrellas stop people from getting wet when it rains, right? So your content should reinforce that solution and issues related to it, right? So you can talk about the weather, you can talk about doing things outside, the history of umbrellas, the design of umbrellas. But people are going to be more engaged with that type of content and want to develop a relationship with you, rather than if you were simply talking about the features and benefits of your umbrella, right? You become umbrellas, you become the authority umbrellas, and people want to engage. So I think that's a big shift, right? Products outside of pharma do this well. It's time for pharma to start doing the same. Content as a product is my thing, right? And I look at the Lego movie. The Lego movie is probably the best example of content as a product, right? It generated values for those watching it and for the company itself, right? So I'm not saying that pharma should create, the pharma movie, but I'm just saying, like, there are some really great examples that we can aspire to, right? And I think that we've talked about it a little bit, but part of that discipline is we need to test and measure our content, right? We need to make sure that we know how it's being consumed and how well it's doing. We historically have been very good about measuring channels, but not so much about content, right? But time spent, A/B testing, there are ways to measure the value of the content that we're creating. So it's no longer enough to just market with content. We have to market the content itself, right? We need to make sure that we're out there putting content out there that provides value to our customers at the moments that they need it. That's a big shift for pharma.
Yeah, and you mentioned marketing as a key stakeholder. Any other stakeholders that you've seen in this journey that need to really make a larger shift than others?
Legal, medical, and regulatory, for sure.
Well, and Mark, and I would even, just echo, right? So one of the things that we've talked about is, as we've been on this journey and are continuing, is I don't think it's just one group, right? It's the entire organization needs to evolve. And maybe I have a slightly different perspective because I'm not just commercial in terms of how we're engaging and responsible for driving those experiences. But it's really, medical will need to shift because we're going to start creating that's where content starts and data, right? Commercial needs to change in how it thinks about going about planning, right? Planning needs to move out of a one time a year event from a budgeting life cycle perspective. That is something we need to do, and that's not going to change. But when you're talking about what we're talking about, it's content marketing. It's how you're shifting, how you're optimizing, how you're dialing up and dialing down, because we're getting information quicker to get the most out of, and Kate, to your point, perfection isn't always what you need. You need compliant and accurate, right? Which I know is you would agree. But building on top of that when it makes sense is really trying to build that speed and relevancy in.
Yes, agreed.
So, Elias, why do you think it's been so hard for pharma to advance, strategy, operational intelligence compared to other industries?
Yeah, I think we've met the enemy. It's us. I personally, that's more of a personal view. I think the fact that we have enjoyed high margins for years, this was more of an innovation challenge for companies and not a survival mode or a mode in order for us to continue evolving. I think over the past few years, when we started coming under pressure, we started having to ask, what is fair? Who should be paying for the inefficiencies in the system? And it's definitely not a patient, right? So the burden is back on us to help solve those challenges. I think the second piece is, for years, we've let that excuse that we're a heavily regulated industry stand in our way. Every time you approach a group wanting to do something different, they you're going to be not in compliance with the code, stop there. We've never had an open dialogue into moving from tactics towards campaigns. And that, I think, has slowed us down a little bit. The last piece, and I know you and I have talked about this before, we've been waiting for that technology partner that comes as a savior and tells us, here is the A to Z technology stack that will take you from creating the content, approving the content with speed, personalizing it and orchestrating it in an omni-channel way, and then measuring everything, the atoms and the actual content, and creating that closed loop. The reality is, while those stacks exist, they're not pharma stacks. Not everybody has got the A to Z solution. So they're trying to sell you pieces of it. And then you're trying to say, okay, how do I do this while staying compliant? How do I do this? So I don't think we're there yet. Few players are really pushing the boundaries. But I think this has for years been a challenge for us. And building it on our own will create technical debt, you know, it will, you know, involve a lot of money. And then by the time you're done with building the stack, your stack is already outdated from a tech perspective. So you have to like redo it all over again.
And if I can add, I mean, the industry, including ourselves, as you say, Lars, we've been very good at setting our own standard operating procedures and quality processes. It certainly hasn't been helping us, right? And personal experience, we've been challenging that in Novo Nordisk for good reason. And, you know, the whole mind shift, set shift on quality that is still very, very important, but we can look at it in different ways, is certainly transforming our approach. And of course, technology and the progression of technology is again an accelerator. Things become possible before that wasn't before. So we're now seeing a greater increase of transparency, and that's a word I would like to really put in there: transparency on how content is utilized. I can tell you right now, we're getting some pretty staggering insights into content that's floating around in the organization that we're questioning. Hey, is this a good idea? You know, and maybe we can become more efficient, less confusing in our approach to the markets and our affiliates, etc. So transparency is another key element of evolution.
So Thomas,
yeah, the only other thing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Tara.
No, I was just going to add off of the themes there, and again, going back to, I think everyone's in a different place in the respective journey. I think a lot of the slowness has also been, and I say this with all due respect, but one of pharma's biggest investments. It's its field organization. One of the biggest aspects of ROI and impact has been the field organization, and again, that's great. And most have been on this journey of it took a while to be able to demonstrate impact because of the investments that they may have been coming, but they were still small. I can at least share in our world, we went from defending our honor to them going, how do I get more out of this? Because we now can actually prove that impact. And then COVID, right? It comes back to that acceleration and perfect storm, but you still have those resistance. So I think, again, it's going to vary where folks are. And I think and at least in our world, is we believe you can't solely focus on content, but content is extremely critical to everything we're talking about. It's really starting up front with that customer lens and engagement, obviously anchored in what the brand or business needs to accomplish, right? So.
Great.
So in terms of measurement, Thomas, how do you actually measure success of these tangible outputs of changing your approach to content?
Yeah, so you know, as you mentioned in the beginning, we've been on this for some time now, and in the beginning it was very straightforward for me. It was about, you know, the cost of the asset, the use of the asset, the reuse of the asset, the time to market, and the quality, right? But now I've come to realize that that's more of an operational excellence parameter. That's great. That's kind of like the entry level. Now it becomes much more, the next step of the evolution is that transparency, so the reporting capabilities. The transparency I get on all the assets and how well we are disciplined around it, or the lack thereof. And the evolution that we're going to now is more the enlightenment or insight or intelligence, call it what you want, but where we're actually able to answer strategic questions, like are we executing according to strategy? What content engaging is in what channels and why, right? So we're going through that evolution. So to answer your question, it was basic, you know, more operational excellence KPIs, and I would recommend anyone to set some of that when they start, but also have a longer term perspective, because there's always going to be someone who can do it cheaper, right? So we need to evolve.
And Thomas, I couldn't agree more. That's why we've also, you know, operational metrics are absolutely important, and it helps you understand how you're doing and where you can do better. But the external, meaning the impact that may have had and how it has been what's really helped give us the support from that acceleration too.
So as you start to look, sorry, go ahead, Elias.
I was going to add, like, I fully agree with what Thomas and Tara said on the operational metrics, etc. But I continue to, you know, in one of the discussions that we've had, we've talked about content as data. You know, content equals data, and data on everything. As an industry, we are very empirically driven, right? It's clinical trials, the statistical significance, etc. And then when we come to the operational side, we lose that in a way. So first you establish those operational metrics and you track them and you bring discipline into it, but then you need to get to a place where content is actually data that will inform several aspects of how you run the business on the commercial side and even on the medical side. To Tara's point, it starts all the way in the design of those clinical trials, and you take it all the way down to when you commercialize the product.
So if you look at it from that perspective, you can actually see how this advanced approach to content can fundamentally change the commercial ecosystem of organizations, right? As you mentioned, marketing, agency partnerships were mentioned, even roles in brand teams. Maybe we can use the last minutes of this panel to just go around the panel and give your thoughts on what are some of the biggest changes that this can drive in the overall commercial ecosystem. Maybe Tara, we start off with you.
Well, so, and I think I briefly mentioned this earlier, I think it's going to change, I think it's going to evolve, right, and change and create some new roles as well that we may not yet have really had expertise or depth in, right? To your point, and this I think has been evolving. The role that we have with our agencies will in fact evolve, right? I think someone mentioned earlier, right? Most of us have already decoupled production, whether we've done that in-house or whether we've done that via, selective and outsourced providers, and that will continue. How we actually produce is really what's going to change, right? Within that construct, you might see some roles go away. You might see some new roles added. I think you'll see pharma have a deeper need around true content strategy and content expertise like we're talking about here. And I don't necessarily mean always the editorial writing, but that those decisions also need to be made because that's part of how you produce, right? I think when you look internally, right, and pharma, this is probably more of its struggle as an industry is it does require more agility built into those operations and how we execute, right? A lot of what we're talking is, the mindset is massive and the behavior changes too. Technology can enable almost anything, right? But you have to build it in a way that you're continuing to build in that flexibility, which is hard for any industry. And then I think if you even look at the roles across my respective team, right? I think those roles will continue to change, and we've evolved over time, right? We started out tactically to clean up the wild west and build discipline. We took on accountability from a marketing perspective. Then we became more strategic in taking on more of a broader plan across channels. So I think you're seeing some natural evolutions, and I do think every organization is going to be different, right? Because they're not all going to implement this the same way, and your corporate culture and view on this will determine how that gets set up. Again, whether it's insourced, outsourced, hybrids, et cetera. So I think you're going to see a lot of evolution, and I think agencies and the holding companies, I think they've been primed for change, and this is going to continue to further and accelerate that. It's a lot there, I realize, but I think the evolution and journey is going to touch all of us.
I agree 100% with everything Tara just said, for sure. I do think one of the things she said that really struck me, there will be new roles, right? There will be roles in pharma that don't exist in pharma today, which will focus, I believe, more on the customer experience than the brand experience. I think right now we're structurally organized to provide a brand experience, right? Which the customer needs at some level too. But I think if we can find efficiencies to deliver the brand experience, then that frees up resources to focus on innovation, service, support in the customer experience. And so I think that will be a big shift that we will see coming forward.
Fantastic. Thomas, Elias, any final comments on this before we move to the Q&A?
I think a lot has been said already. I think that the role, especially of the brand marketeer, the classical brand marketeer, will change, and hopefully for the better. So they don't need to spend so much time on, dealing with tactics in their agency, decoupling for sure, more brain power into what actually engages, and back to the product as a content, content as a product terminology. I like that because that's where we need them to use the brain power, right? While we decouple. Now we know what others like also others. We scale through people where the cost is good. But I would like to see a future where we scale through technology. So, out there in the future, AI generated content that engages. You can actually do that based on data, right? So as we get there, why not scale more through technology and really use our brain power to figure out what truly engages, what truly provides value. That's the golden nugget, right? So cracking that one is super difficult.
Yeah, I think for the way I look at it, and maybe it's because of my role, I have both the kind of the operations side, but I also have the analytical side of the organization. I think the roles that will have to evolve is definitely on the analytics side to really help us understand our customer better, because the data is there. We just need to mine it and make sense of it in a better way. Marketing will definitely have to move. There's a lot to be learned about agile and agile ways of doing work. So marketing will have to evolve into agile. And to the point that Thomas brought, and I think we've talked about it, I think Tara touched on it, on the scale. We could do a lot of tests and designs at a smaller scale. But when it comes to scaling, often people want to approach the technology piece first. You bring technology at the end, because technology can be a solution, but it's never the problem. The problem is the processes, the way we work, the way we interact cross-functionally within each other. So I think these are, for me, the few things that will have to happen for us to move into this new paradigm.
Yeah.
Exciting. So I see our discussion has stimulated a lot of audience commentary. So we use the remaining time to answer those questions. Thank you again for all the stimulating discussion. And let's see what other things people want to know about.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right. Fantastic. Great conversation. Let's move, as I said, to the Q&A, and let's start with a question for the panel. And, you know, we're speaking to experts here today, all working or running advanced content supply chains, but not everybody is there. So I really appreciate the question. Can, as a panel, speak to the specifics on how to set up content and supply chain, and what are the challenges to implementing that infrastructure?
So Mark, I guess I'll start and ask my colleagues to chime in. And I think, at least from our experience, it's not starting with the ecosystem or the technology. It's really, one, understanding what you're trying to accomplish in that experience and how content and the ecosystem plays a role in helping you achieve that, right? I will tell you, our ecosystem is continuing to evolve as we mature or as we go deeper into these particular areas, or really building on top of that solid foundation. So I think it becomes important to really look at it as a journey, not defining a complete, what does perfect look like at the end, because you're going to iterate and have to be agile as the world changes. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
No, I can add, and it's absolutely true, Tara. Though platform absolutely does play a part in a supply chain, especially if you want transparency, right? And if you're coming from a company where there's all kinds of systems in place, it's not going to help you. So some level of centralization will increase the transparency and also make you execute. And if you want speed, then you simply need to centralize platforms at some point, and also at some level metrics, right? But of course, empower local to do what they need to do. But yeah, so it's a combination, but you should start in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and then rapidly centralize some elements. I would recommend.
And I would say, think about the content you're creating differently, right? Think about how you can reuse content. You don't have to create it fresh every time. And I think we don't also have to generate our own content every time, right? You can think about curating content or syndicating content or partnering with others to get content. So you can be a content machine if you are sourcing it in different ways as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll add to this, I tend to think of everything as a process, and content is the output, right? So you got to go back and first look at the process, and then you layer the technology. If you start with the technology, I think you're doomed to fail. No technology will solve the business problem.
and technology to enable the operations and toward your goal. Very good. By the way, I want to apologize to the audience. We have questions rolling on in at a fast pace. We will only get to some of them. I try to group them as much as I can, but please take advantage of the networking opportunities with other peers, also panelists here. Hopefully some of the questions we can't get to will be addressed in that dialogue. And also, if there's something that was here in the last session or any of the sessions, please invite your colleagues. All the sessions are available on demand. So even if they miss them live, they'll still be able to take advantage of the expertise that's being shared here. So, so to move on, Kate, along the lines what you mentioned, there was a question around how will this like intelligent modular content, how will it change the approach to generating it? What is the role of third-party content, user-generated content? How will it change the dynamics in way of pharma? We're really generating content between a brand and an agency primarily, but now we're creating these pieces that where the inspiration will come from anywhere. Maybe I'll start off with you, Kate, around that.
Yeah, so building on what I just said, I think, again, we don't need to create all our own content, and there's a lot of content out there that we can use. So I always use this example, right? Would you want to get sleep tips from GSK, who's not in the sleep business, or sleep tips from GSK in partnership with the National Sleep Foundation, right? So I think we can look to different places, third parties, to get content to help fill that content machine that I was speaking about. I think user-generated content, right? I know that I always look at the reviews before I book a hotel and listen to others' opinions. We've not figured that out yet, but we would like to. I mean, and I think that's an area that we're really trying to harness the power of those influencers, the people that actually have the experience. So if anyone has a solution to that, I would love to hear it. But again, think beyond just your own content creation. Where can we get good sources of content? Where can we partner to fill the content funnel?
But I think a part of the solution to that is actually freeing up the minds and the time of marketeers to not do production and tactical development and thinking strategically in terms of what engages. And if a supply chain can provide further transparency in what actually engages, and they can apply mind power to that, then we're at least a step closer. What I've seen and experienced is we're spending a lot of time on the production, the tactical execution, etc. That's just needs to be easy, right? And then decouple. That's a word that I learned some years back. But if you haven't heard about it before, look it up. That's what you need to do.
I really liked the comments that Sebastian made this morning in the keynote around providing HCPs with content that helps them do their jobs better, right? That means we need to think about content very, very differently and go way beyond just branded advertising to other types of content. And so I really, really thought that was powerful because, of course, I share the same opinion.
Very good. There was another question. Actually, I'll put something else since we talked about modular content. There was a question of, is this really just a vision, or are, leaders like yourself actually well on the way of modular content? How real is this? As much as you can share confidentially. Elias, I saw you reacting. Maybe you kick that one off.
No, I think we've moved beyond the vision, right? We have it's a matter of evolving. Right? We need to evolve as an industry, we need to evolve as companies. And I think Tara mentioned a lot of us are doing small pilots. The key is how do you scale? How do you scale at, for example, for us in the US, but also how do you start scaling globally, right? With different authorities, different labels, how do you create the right business role in order to know which content can be used where and leverage the power of scale? Because that's how you can do it, to Thomas' point. Cheaper, you could do it if you want to spend a lot of money on it, but the key is how to do it in the most efficient and effective manner.
Tara, what can you share?
Well, I would say just to add with Elias, right, is I think, again, we're in a lot of different places based on different brands. I think scale is where we're all trying to march towards, and some of those questions he just raised, right, we still have yet to answer. I think what we have been able to accomplish is where we have applied this approach, right? It did start with engagement planning. We did define a content strategy at a customer segment level where we could, right, customize, because we're not always going to be able to do what we would like to stay in compliant and what information we may or may not have based on customer preference. And I think it's a continuous learn in how you apply, right? For anyone that's been involved with customizing experiences, the data gets better over time, the more that you drive those valuable or meaningful engagements. And again, I'm not talking about value in terms of dollar. That will drive how that experience gets honed and better based on the individual that's engaging, right? And I think that goes back to some of what we were talking about earlier of having that two-way dialogue across all of the touch points, so that we're showing up in one way with the customer regardless of where they're engaging.
Great. By the way, there's quite a few questions around this topic and some of the technicalities. I invite the audience to check out the Indogene Experience Zone and the publications to just get some detail around AI, technology, how it's being leveraged in this area. So if you're interested, there's a lot of data accessible to you there. Fantastic. Next question, and I really like to pose this to all of you, and it's an interesting one, is what would be the one thing you would change if you had to, obviously you have the power, but if you could change one thing with a magic wand to enable more advanced customer-focused content campaigns at scale, what would be the one thing that you could use your magic spell on?
Do it sooner.
Well,
yeah, if I could pick two.
I might do more than just one, but if I were to narrow it down to one, Mark, I would say it's really stop trying to tinker with what you have, right? I think that also adds to our incremental progress, is we're always working within the constraints. If we could leave that and build, fresh with new mindsets aligned, I think that would allow that too, because we're always working around not barriers, but how do you work within the constraints you have? And sometimes you can only go so far. So that would be mine.
That's a good point. Yeah. Sometimes you have to just throw it out. And
yeah. Culture? I would say culture. I think for us, the barrier is culture, right? We've always done it this way. I feel comfortable doing it this way. I've always defined my job this way. So for me, I think it's really getting people to think about their role in content creation. So then that goes to legal, medical, regulatory, not so much as guardian of the company, but a good business partner. Like, how do we get people to think about everybody creating quality content that customers want to engage with? I think that culture for me.
Can I throw another add-on question, Kate, since you mentioned that, because there are questions around change management. How do you think we need to approach change management differently, other than a magic spell, to drive that cultural change?
I like the magic wand approach. So I think that one, it has to come from the top, right? I mean, leadership needs to really lean in. Again, I'll go back. I really enjoyed the keynote this morning, because it was great to hear a president speaking about the digital evolution so eloquently and so impactfully, right? So I think that's it, right? I think leadership really needs to set the tone and really drive the agenda, and that's where when change will happen. Trying to do it from the bottom up is not going to work.
And adding to that, I mean, I've been reflecting a lot on that recently, and bottom up versus top down, adaptation versus transformation, right? And of course, if you want we really own it in the accountability, and yes, this is a good idea approach, then it's a bit of bottom up, right? But if you need speed and truly transformation, you need more top down, and that's also what I've come to conclude, that now is really the time to shift from a bottom up grassroots to much more top down, because the numbers speak for themselves. But it's quite amazing how people are simply incapable of jumping unless they're on a burning platform, and that's it just sometimes.
Yeah.
So Thomas, you said you had two things that you extended your magic 1 to 2 wishes. What's the second?
And there was do it sooner and more top down. So that was two magics.
No, I think, Mark, the only other thing that I would add too is and it's funny, I had picked this up years ago when I was leading some other significant change, and someone said, stop calling it change, right? Because it automatically gives people it's hard, it's different, and their defense goes up, right? I think that mindset is not about change management, but evolutionary. And how do you bring people along on that evolution, right, on a journey? Because as we've discussed earlier, and we heard this morning in the keynote, is it's not a transformation. It doesn't have a start and an end date, right? It's a continued base evolution. And by the way, when we get to whatever our each of our respective visions may be within our company, that bar is going to move, right? And how we're able to continue to be agile and advance in that, I think that's part of it. So 2-cent vote on not calling it change management, just because I think it starts to shift the mindset a little bit.
Good point. Elias, you still have a wish left for the journey?
Yeah, no. Well, one of the wishes is that we stop calling, giving ourselves the excuse that we're a heavily regulated industry. There are other heavily regulated industries that have made the leap. We could also self-regulate ourselves. I mean, we have a history that we should continue to learn from it. And if we apply this lens and we ask ourselves, like, would a patient care whether we're heavily regulated or not? So if we want to adopt a patient a quarterback or a customer as a quarterback, would the patient really care about what are our hurdles? And if you change that and move into setting up the vision, yes, go and top down, but also bottom up, say, this is the vision, that's the transformation journey, or that's the evolution journey that we're going to follow. It's not going to be a magic wand where tomorrow you're going to come to work and everything's going to be different. It's going to be small eyes, small innovation that is going to drive there, and small doses will eventually change the culture. Culture cannot be shifted by one event. It's a cyclical, iterative process. And that's, I think, what we need to do, is to continue to deliver small doses of innovation in the way we work, but also do not be deterred by the hurdles that we're going to see.
Great.
And celebrate the wins, right? I mean, I think one of the things we're so focused on the next step that we don't celebrate what we've accomplished, right? And so I think that's one of the things that really brings people along.
Good points. And actually, Elias, I want to pick up on what you said around regulatory. There were quite a few questions around how can the LMR review or PRC or whatever you call in your organization handle that volume of modular content? How can you submit this to the FDA when things aren't final in each and the iterations are endless? So a lot of questions around that. So how do you guys address this whole regulatory barrier, real or perceived?
So I think, fundamentally you need to shift the discussion from a tactic by tactic to approving bulk content, right? But there's always the us versus them, right? The marketers versus the MLR, and they're always trying to stop us from innovating and doing what we want to do. And I think it starts by going and having a discussion, because I don't think people go to law school or to medical school to debate about a word in a promotional material. It's not the most engaging task that they do on a daily basis. They, like us, want to push the science and present treatments to patients that are suffering from diseases. So I think if you go there and adopt the approach of, you're not happy, I'm not happy, and we need to fix it, versus the continuous pitting the two teams against each other and playing referee between the two, that's not going to solve the problem. If you go there, and I think also probably the same applies to the FDA, they're also receiving all of our tactics, and with more personalization, we're going to inundate them. So they also want to find a way to do this in a more efficient manner. So I think they're all real people that are, seeing the problem from different lenses, and we could go and have discussions with them. Internally, we need to shift our thinking to approving claims, approving modules with certain business rules that guarantee the integrity of the message that we're trying to say. And once you do that, I think you solve the bottleneck question, and you have probably happier marketers and happier MLR folks and potentially happier regulatory agencies.
Great.
And a comment from me as well. One thing is transparency on how long time it actually takes and what resources it drives negatively today. So that actually spurs a good discussion. Then secondly, de-risking by having a modular approach where you can simply start to de-risk individual components of approval. So are we there yet? No, we're not, but at least we're now thinking the right thoughts, creating the transparency we are, and that's a good start. And then also that further fuels the need for a modular content and modular approvals.
Very good. So we're getting to the end of the session. We have a keynote coming up in a minute from now. Dr. Daniel Kraft from Singularity University, a very inspirational individual. So I recommend joining this. I want to thank this panel, though, first of all, for a fantastic discussion. There's more questions pouring in. Again, sorry we couldn't get through all of them. Hopefully there'll be more dialogue, asynchronous, offline, online throughout this conference. I want to thank the panelists again. It's my true honor to be engaging with you on this topic and for you to be part of this event. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.